Okay, let's unpack this. We've been given a stack of sources here, diving into something that truly blurs the line between science fiction and documented reality.
Yeah, it really does.
It's all about technologies for stimulating the brain and potentially influencing, maybe even controlling the human mind.
It's a heavy topic, absolutely. And the sources we looked at, they don't shy away from that complexity at all.
Right.
They pull from research papers, military documents, patents, news reports, really trying to paint a detailed picture of this fascinating and frankly sometimes alarming field.
Think of this deep dive as your shortcut, to getting your head around a complex subject.
Oh.
Touches on brain science, military strategy, personal privacy.
And some really fundamental ethical questions, too.
Exactly. Our mission today is to pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge, the key insights from all this material for you.
We want to help you see the full landscape. There's incredible potential for positive change, the sources discuss, but there's also the very real documented history and potential future of misuse and control. And the sources make it really clear the ethical debate is lagging way behind the science here.
And here's where it gets really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't just like theoretical stuff.
No, not at all.
The sources ground themselves in historical projects, actual current capabilities backed by patents, and even strategic military planning documents that lay out future intentions.
So what does this all mean for you? It means we're going to trace these ideas. We'll start with the basic science of brain influence.
Okay.
Go through the documented sort of shadowy history of government exploration like MKUltra. Right up to these pretty stunning capabilities described in military forecasts. And we'll even look at how some of these concepts might show up in everyday life.
Okay, let's start then with that core idea presented across these sources.
Mm-hmm.
The brain isn't sealed off. It can be influenced by external signals.
That's the absolute foundation, yeah. The sources repeatedly point to specific types of signals, pulsed electromagnetic fields, pulsed light, pulsed sound signals, as having documented impacts on human physiology and mental states.
And the research goes deeper, showing these influences aren't just superficial. They indicate certain brain states can be influenced to cause actual measurable changes within the brain itself.
Right. And this, in turn, allows individuals using these technologies to influence conditions in their own mind and body, things that were once considered completely beyond our conscious control.
That's a powerful concept.
It really is. And on the positive side, the sources highlight significant progress. Areas like supporting individuals with learning disabilities or ADHD, accelerating stroke recovery, even facilitating accelerated learning, helping overcome addiction, and just generally enhancing human performance.
The potential for positive applications sounds immense, really. Imagine gaining that level of conscious control over your own biology and mind states.
And the sources specifically mention biofeedback coupled with brain state inducement.
Right, I saw that.
They suggest this combo allows a person to learn to modify specific brain activities purposefully. The comparison they use is striking. You know, that someone could potentially achieve in weeks what might take a Zen master 20 years through traditional meditation.
Wow, weeks versus 20 years. That really puts the potential acceleration into perspective.
It does. Examples given include children with ADHD learning to regulate brain activity without medication, and stroke victims showing, significantly faster recovery using these techniques with therapy.
The research also touches on more passive influences, right? Like human suggestibility, especially when tired.
Exactly. And it highlights how everyday stimulation, like from radio or TV, can impact learning processes subconsciously, often because we sort of drift in and out of paying attention while that information is coming in.
The sources frame the shift into the 21st century as moving focus away from just the physical body, maybe the emphasis in the 80s and 90s.
Right, towards actively building and optimizing the mind, mental performance.
And integrating these technologies into education is raised as a possibility.
Which immediately sparks that critical question. If you can potentially bypass normal intellectual filters and, deposit information or influence learning states, who decides what is learned or how?
It brings us right back to that two-edged sword idea, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The sources state the potential is equally great for destructive or constructive change.
And sadly, when you look at the historical documentation, the sources present, the exploration of that destructive edge by military and intelligence communities is, well, very evident.
It seems almost inherent, according to this material. The military and intelligence communities, they've clearly focused significant research here. Stated goals like enhancing friendly soldiers while degrading adversaries.
The sources note that sophisticated countries aren't just exploring this. They say systems for behavior control are already developed or under development, part of this concept they call the revolution in military affairs.
And there's specific concern raised about the potential for covert use of these technologies by military planners, law enforcement.
One program that looms large in this historical context is MK-Ultra.
Yes, definitely. The sources describe it as the CIA's most far-reaching drug and mind control program during the Cold War, headed by someone they call Dr. Strangelove, Dr. Gottlieb.
And MK-Ultra's goal was basically to find techniques to control human behavior for counterintelligence, covert action, using drugs, psychological methods, and other means.
Right. The program technically ended in '64, but the sources say a more streamlined version, MK Search, kept going with Gottlieb involved until 1972.
What kicked off some of this interest? The sources point partly to perceived Soviet advances, right? Like the Moscow embassy microwave incident.
Yeah. The Soviets bombarding the U.S. embassy, and the U.S. understanding this was meant to disrupt purposeful thought. That certainly played a role.
A 1994 report cited on MK-Ultra gives some frustrating details. Like, the CIA deliberately destroyed most of the files in '73.
Right, but then they later found others in fiscal records, detailing over 150 sub-projects. It's important to note, though, while those specific files didn't show radiation use, the CIA did investigate microwave effects on humans directly because of the Moscow embassy incident, so the interest was there.
And the Church Committee investigation found some records, but noted MK-Ultra's practice was basically not to keep records of planning or approval, making accountability almost impossible.
Exactly. The sources state the CIA worked closely with the Army on things like the LSD experiments and explicitly sponsored numerous experiments on unwitting humans, people who had no idea what was happening to them.
The tragic death of Frank Olson.
Huh.
The Army scientist who committed suicide after being unknowingly given LSD that triggered an internal investigation. But the practice continued.
For at least another 10 years, according to these sources, despite the warnings.
Wow.
A deputy director, even after 1963, advocated for continuing covert testing, the reasons given. Diminishing operational capability without realistic testing and needing to keep pace with the Soviets.
The reasons cited for eventually stopping unwitting tests included risk of embarrassment, and they called it the moral problem. But the quote is stark. We have no answer to the moral issue.
Which, according to the sources, meant they just ignored the moral questions, destroyed records, hid the truth, and kept going. Participating organizations apparently used national security laws to dodge disclosure and accountability. Records that could have jailed participants were deliberately destroyed. It's a pattern.
That history, the secrecy, the controversial programs, it definitely sets the stage for the unsettling capabilities described when the sources talk about future military planning.
It absolutely does. The sources talk about a scientific revolution changing the world, and they identify control of the human mind as a key area within that revolution.
A military document, The Information Revolution and the Future Air Force, discusses this directly, puts it within these broader geopolitical information tech shifts.
And another concept described is biological process control, a different direction for future conflicts.
How so?
The idea is, in situations where full lethal force isn't desirable, maybe against hostile populations, non-lethal force becomes preferred.
So using physical agents, acoustic, optical, electromagnetic fields, not to kill, but to interact directly with biological processes.
Yeah.
To control adversaries without massive loss of life or property damage.
Exactly. And focusing on electromagnetic fields, the prediction is quite specific. A virtual explosion of knowledge in neuroscience, expected before the mid-21st century, leading to a clear understanding of how the brain works and therefore how it can be manipulated.
And this understanding could lead to focused electromagnetic energy sources capable of
well, the list is astonishing. Preventing voluntary muscle movements.
Controlling emotions and thus actions.
Inducing sleep. Transmitting suggestions.
Interfering with short-term and long-term memory.
Even producing or deleting specific experience sets.
Just hearing that phrase, producing or deleting an experience set, is, well, it's pretty unsettling.
Yeah.
These capabilities, the sources suggest, could be used in armed conflict, terrorist or hostage situations, even training, offering control without lethal outcomes or collateral damage. Initial experimentation, they say, focused on how EM energy interacts with neuromuscular junctions, the nerve-muscle connection.
Right, and the idea of a weapon to render an opponent incapable of higher motor skills is described as reasonable for individuals, maybe harder for a large force, but probably feasible in contained areas, like that hostage situation example. It points to a very different kind of warfare.
One of the most specific and maybe most unsettling capabilities detailed is this voice in the head possibility.
Yes, they cite a U.S. Air Force document mentioning creating high-fidelity speech directly within the human body, the implication being covert suggestion, psychological direction, messing with adversaries.
How would that even work?
The sources explain it could potentially involve pulsed microwave energy directed at the head. These pulses cause a tiny rapid temperature change and expansion in tissue,
Okay.
creating an audible acoustic wave inside the skull, usually described as being in the 5 to 15 kilohertz range.
And the sources are pretty definite about this, aren't they? They ask, is it possible to transmit a signal to the brain from a distance that someone understands? Or send sound so only the target hears a voice? And their answer is...
A clear yes, based on the material they reviewed.
They back this up by saying the technology exists now, pointing to military literature, experiments, patents, independent research.
One source makes a particularly strong claim here, saying this research points towards the ultimate weapon of political control, placing information directly into the brain, bypassing all our normal conscious filters.
They cite a 1995 DoD contract communicating via the microwave auditory effect. Said it described the feasibility of low probability of intercept RF communications using this effect, established in lab and field, applications in search rescues, security, special ops.
And controversially, the sources even link this type of tech to the Gulf War, claiming Iraqi soldiers were demoralized not just by bombs, but by non-lethal systems inducing fear, specifically mentioning ultra-high-frequency silent sounds or silent subliminals used for psychological programming.
Wow. And they suggest more powerful versions could cause physical symptoms: head pain, nosebleeds, disorientation, nausea.
Yeah, that potential is raised. Tracing the history, they go back to Dr. Alan Frey's 1961 observation, the human auditory system responding to low-power RF energy as internal sound. Later patents by Puharich and Lawrence described hearing devices, but those needed physical contact.
But by 1962, Frey showed he could create sound at a distance with a pulsed radio transmitter. That was seen as tuning into the brain, right?
Exactly, like tuning a radio using energy at a different frequency, but modulated correctly.
G. Patrick Flanagan's 68 patent is mentioned too. A nervous system excitation device, required skin contact initially, sent an audible signal through the nervous system to the brain. Apparently, he had to demonstrate it on a deaf employee to get it patented.
His 72 patent improved efficiency, coding speech into modulated square waves for better transfer to the nervous system, decoded as sound. The result was reportedly clear, audible sound.
Then, military interest. The 71 psychoacoustic projector patent from General Dynamics, using a directional beam, modulated with noise, code, or speech, to disorient enemies while friendlies could still communicate.
A 74 report confirmed the mechanism, microwaves changing into acoustic signals heard inside the head, identifying the tissue as the transducer.
By 89, advancements combined modulated signals on microwave carriers, 100 megahertz to 10 gigahertz range, for more efficient sound delivery via frequency-modulated bursts. Patents confirm this.
92 patent described a silent subliminal system using non-neural carriers audio, ultrasonic propagated acoustically or vibrationally, though that needed close proximity.
The sources present these patents and research as like stepping stones towards a new weapon system.
They do, and they highlight work by scientists like Joseph Sharp collaborating with Frey. Sharp himself reportedly heard and understood words generated by pulse microwave analogs. They quote Dr. Robert Becker, commenting on the obvious applications in covert ops, driving targets crazy with voices, delivering undetectable instructions, that kind of thing.
A 96 patent for a wireless ultrasonic speech translator using acoustic pressure waves, focusing on modulation methods.
And maybe most concerning, regarding public knowledge, the sources claim some patents were held back or confiscated by the government, inventors forced to work for the government or shut down under national security orders, suggesting a deliberate effort to keep this secret.
Moving beyond just generating sounds, the sources get into connecting biology with information technology. reading, and maybe altering thoughts and emotions.
Yeah, significant steps are being made there, according to the material. They mention milestones from the 90s, like growing human brain cells in labs,
Right.
and even attempts reported in the Wall Street Journal in '94 to create microchips using living brain cells, inducing them to grow on silicon or glass chips, raising the possibility of, biologically augmented computers.
Initiatives like the Brain Imaging Technology Initiative are cited, aimed at developing advanced tools, neuroimaging, for understanding addiction, evaluating treatments.
But through advanced imaging, the sources suggest it might be possible to do much more. Mapping emotional states, determining chemical influences, perhaps even reading specific thoughts. Measuring the brain's weak magnetic fields has been discussed since the '70s.
And they describe a 1995 patent for a system to capture and decode brain signals, stimulating a person, recording EEG, using a computer to interpret or compare signals to norms.
The goal being understanding conceptual, perceptual, emotional thought, or diagnosing dysfunction. The sources describe it pretty bluntly: reading your mind by comparing your brain activity to others.
This is where it starts feeling particularly Orwellian. They point to a specific 1996 patent as an Orwellian development,
What did that one describe?
remotely determining emotional state, wirelessly transmitting energy, detecting analyzing emitted energy, measuring physiological parameters, blood pressure, pulse, pupil size, respiration, perspiration to evaluate emotional responses or even potential criminal intent.
Wow. Bypassing outward behavior, going straight to brain analysis.
Exactly. The sources also discuss inducing behavior. Professor Michael Persinger's work recreating alien abduction-like experiences using magnetic fields across the head.
Right. His research connects EM fields to unusual brain activity, stimulating temporal lobes, producing mystical, out-of-body experiences, suggesting they might be brain activity, not external events. He also studied ELF effects on memory and brain function.
An earlier '91 patent described a method for changing brainwaves to a desired frequency.
And maybe key to remote influence, a detailed 1975 patent for remotely monitoring and altering brainwaves.
So how did that work?
Sensing brainwaves remotely, transmitting interfering signals back modulated by those waves, receiving the retransmitted waveform, then generating a compensating signal back to change the electrical activity. It's called brain entrainment.
So map brain activity to understand the state, then use a second signal to override or influence natural signals.
Precisely, causing shifts in energy patterns. The source's stress, this can be beneficial or detrimental, depends entirely on control and intent.
And critically, they note RF radiation, radio frequency radiation, can be used as a carrier for those ELF signals, allowing wireless brain entrainment from a distance.
The sources mention a stream of inventions since the '70s using light, sound, EM fields to affect the nervous system, induce states like relaxation, sleep, hypnotic effects, altered consciousness. Multiple patents cited through the '70s, '80s, '90s, suggesting control beyond hypnotherapy or drugs.
These reportedly led to breakthroughs in controlling emotional states, concentration, pain.
A 1990 study showed ELF magnetic fields enhanced temporal lobe experiences, vestibular feelings, depersonalization, imaginings, those weird sensations.
Interestingly, a '96 invention using quartz crystals and weak EM fields for stress relief is noted too, connecting New Age ideas back to scientific patents.
This brings us back to consciousness training. Science enabling states in weeks or days that used to take years. A '96 method measured achieving alpha-theta states and positive motions quickly.
A really fascinating, maybe disturbing '93 patent described creating consciousness states, training replication without stimulation, and transferring states between people.
Transferring states, how?
By imposing one person's EEG pattern onto another using binaural beats. This patent, the sources say, explicitly raises the technical possibility of thought transference that links straight to the military idea of changing memory, right? And that '98 Nature, quote, neuroscientists worried about imaging advances leading to privacy invasion, behavior control, brainwashing, usable at a distance.
Which brings us squarely to the profound ethical issue of memory manipulation itself, a topic the sources explicitly tackle.
It's introduced using Nevada courts allowing hypnotically refreshed testimony since '97. A legal acknowledgement memory isn't fixed.
Right. The sources highlight the extreme complexity when tech could potentially completely change or alter memory, as discussed even by military officers. How do you separate real from unreal? What does that do to reasonable doubt in court?
They argue there's an urgent need to recognize this technology as real before laws and safeguards can even start. noting how long it took the legal system just to grapple with hypnotherapy.
The military concept of changing memory is discussed, imposing computer-manipulated signals designed to integrate seamlessly with normal memory.
The potential for abuse is called obvious, but they also point to the flip side. Personal advancement, maybe education via direct data transfer.
But a really serious consideration they raise is bypassing normal intellectual filters. Information deposited as unquestioned fact. What if it conflicts with existing beliefs?
Or includes hidden information. To influence religious beliefs, politics, consumption, the possibilities are immense.
The sources are blunt. The ethical and moral questions are equally large, and the public debate is lagging way behind the documented scientific and tech advances.
As a bit of a counterpoint, in this section, they include a simple example. The UC Irvine study showing listening to Mozart raised college students' IQ temporarily. A simple, positive, low-tech contrast.
Yeah, a nice touch. Beyond these specific capabilities, the sources detail broader, modern applications and concerns, mostly around electromagnetic radiation, EMR.
Yes, beyond direct biological effects, military interested using EMR for low-intensity conflict. An 84 paper discussed specific biological effects achievable just by controlling EM field parameters, frequency, waveform, pulse rate, power level.
A 1982 Air Force review went further, called Specially Generated RFR Fields Radio Frequency Radiation Fields, Powerful and Revolutionary Military Threats. They noted electroshock therapy already shows you can interrupt mental functioning, maybe obtain cognition, restructure emotions.
So the idea based on RFR experiments in the brain as electrical is that impressed EM fields could disrupt, direct, or interrogate behavior.
At high power, RFR can be lethal. They mention 100 milliamps through the heart muscle, suggesting a rapidly scanning RFR system could stun or kill over a large area.
At lower levels, the potential is raised that RFR might sensitize groups to biological or chemical agents, make them more vulnerable.
Yeah. The sources list potential applications, dealing with terrorists, crowd control, security breaches, anti-personnel techniques, even stimulating anomalous phenomena, whatever that covers.
They mention the CIA's Stargate project, interest in psychics, used secretly for drug enforcement support, find plutonium. Though ultimately deemed unreliable, this became public around when military personnel disclosed it.
A quote from John Alexander is included. Speaking of weapon systems operating on the mind's power demonstrated lethal capacity. A psychotronic weapon being silent, hard to detect, needing only a human operator.
A paper on non-lethal weapons described an RF weapon, a high-powered VLF modulator, very low frequency, creates an acoustic bullet, adjustable power, discomfort, nausea, even shattering bones internally at high power. Aimed at the head, resonating the skull could cause voices.
The sources claim Russia researched this VLF modulator more than the U.S., even offered its use to the FBI during the Waco standoff to make people think God was talking to them. FBI reportedly declined unpredictable.
Operation PyQ, CIA 78. Bouncing high-power radio signals off the ionosphere to affect mental functions, compared to later systems like HARP.
Based on all this, the sources state directly, these systems have been developed, hidden, and the practice continues.
They also touch on anti-machinery weapons, microwave, EMP, laser, the disabling electronics people rely on. Portable versions exist for disabling vehicles, equipment.
So these systems present this complex mix of potential promises and very real risks. The sources anticipate public reaction will eventually force change, and monitoring systems will be needed to detect abuse.
Which brings us to a difficult but necessary point raised, addressing individuals who claim to be victims of secret mind control weapons testing.
Yeah, the wavies, or beamers as they're sometimes called, often dismissed, frequently within psychiatric contexts.
The sources mention a study noting fears about the internet replacing older delusions like CIA or radio waves in some patients, especially those with little computer experience.
It's acknowledged that sorting out genuine potential victims from individuals experiencing psychiatric delusions is incredibly difficult. Attempts to determine reality are often met with dismissiveness, jokes, fear.
A specific example cited is a psychology professor whose research into government surveillance and mind control claims probing alleged implanted devices to read thoughts was reportedly shut down by their university.
The author of some source material mentions receiving hundreds of such claims after releasing a book. While saying they can't definitively sort real from delusion, they strongly believe the claim should be taken seriously, investigated.
Their argument is, these people deserve a place to find truth, understand what happened if something did, or at least get appropriate medical treatment and support.
The sources conclude this point by saying the history of the U.S. is, unfortunately, littered with documented examples of exploitation and experimentation under black budgets, secrecy. This history, they argue, makes it plausible that some victim reports might have a factual basis.
This pattern of potential government control is summarized with an inscription from the FDR Memorial cited in the sources. Systems based on regimentation is not new, and it is not order. A thought-provoking end of that section.
Definitely. So we've taken a deep dive into this fascinating and, yeah, at times profoundly unsettling world described across these sources.
We've traced the fundamental science of influencing the brain, explored the military's decades-long, sometimes dark interest from MKLTRA onwards,
Detailed the cutting-edge capabilities in future military planning docs, examined the tech claimed to create sounds and voices in the head,
looked at the potential for reading and altering emotions, memories, and touched on the huge ethical and societal questions this all raises.
What's really fascinating and a key takeaway is that dual nature, incredible potential for good health, learning potential, but simultaneously raising these fundamental questions about control, privacy, agency, even reality itself.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's clear from this material. These capabilities, some sounding like pure sci-fi, are rooted in decades of real research, documented patents, military planning. It's not just theory in these sources.
No, it's presented as documented reality or concrete planning.
And this all comes back to that important question emphasized repeatedly in the sources. The ethical debate is lagging significantly behind the scientific and technical advances that seem to have already happened or are well underway.
So what stands out to you listening to all this? How do we as individuals trying to stay informed and as a society grapple with the implications? Technologies documented here as potentially influencing minds, reading emotions, altering memories.
A lot to take in.
It is. What steps are needed based on the concerns raised right here in these sources to ensure potential benefits are explored ethically, transparently, while preventing the kinds of misuse and covert application that these same sources suggest is already happening or being planned?